There is a moment in every war when the architecture of control starts to crack, not dramatically, not with a single explosion. It cracks quietly in the gap between what diplomats announce and what soldiers do an hour later. We hit that moment Thursday night. 4 rockets left Lebanese soil at 11:30 p.m. and flew north into Israeli territory. The target was Shtula, a community on Israel's northern border. The Israel Defense Forces confirmed the rockets crossed into their territory. All 4 were intercepted, no casualties. And within minutes, the IDF struck the launcher. That exchange lasted less than an hour. But understand what it represents, because this is the thing that every anchor and commentator is glossing over. A ceasefire was in effect, had been for days. Trump had just extended it in the Oval Office, with the Israeli and Lebanese ambassadors sitting feet away from him, praising the moment as historic. The Israeli ambassador called it decades in the making. Trump called it very exciting, and when asked what was different this time, he answered with one word, me. And then, while that scene was still playing on television screens across the world, rockets were already in the air over northern Lebanon. This is not a footnote. This is the entire story. Let me build this properly, because you need the full frame to understand what is actually happening. On March 2nd, Hezbollah entered the war. Not reluctantly, deliberately. They opened fire on Israel in explicit support of Iran. What followed was 6 weeks of the most intense fighting Lebanon has seen since 2006. Lebanese authorities now confirm that nearly 2,500 people have been killed in Lebanon since the fighting began. That number includes 177 children, according to Times of Israel reporting sourced from Lebanese government data. More than 1.2 million people have been displaced. The IDF says at least 1,800 Hezbollah operatives have been killed. Hezbollah says it fired approximately 5,500 rockets at IDF troops in southern Lebanon and another 2,500 rockets at Israel itself. 2 Israeli civilians have been killed. 15 IDF soldiers have died in southern Lebanon, 2 of them during the ceasefire period. Those last 2 words should stop you cold. 2 soldiers killed during the ceasefire. A ceasefire that Hezbollah claims Israel has violated more than 200 times since it took effect. A ceasefire that Israel says Hezbollah has been probing and testing since day one, with operatives crossing ceasefire lines, drone attacks on IDF positions, anti-tank missiles fired toward Israeli troops, each side using the language of retaliation. Each side describing its escalation as defensive. This is the loop that every Middle East ceasefire eventually enters. And we are deep inside it right now. On April 22nd, an Israeli airstrike killed Lebanese journalist Amal Khalil. A photographer accompanying her, Zainab Faraj, was critically injured. Lebanese Red Cross teams said the Israeli military obstructed their access to the scene. The UN Human Rights Office released a statement Friday saying it has documented patterns of attacks on civilians in populated areas and residential buildings in both Lebanon and Israel that may amount to serious violations of international humanitarian law. Let me read you what the UN actually said about Hezbollah's rockets, because this part usually gets lost. The OHCHR said Hezbollah was firing unguided rockets that lacked the precision required to strike specific military targets, and that they damaged civilian infrastructure in Israel in ways that likely violated international humanitarian law. Both sides documented by the United Nations on the same day, and Trump extended the ceasefire anyway because he had to, because the alternative right now in the middle of a naval standoff over the Strait of Hormuz with oil at $105 a barrel, with Iran and the U.S. still circling each other in what might charitably be called pre-negotiations, is unthinkable. Or at least it should be. But here is where the geometry of this war becomes genuinely dangerous. Hezbollah lawmaker Hassan Fadlallah gave an interview this week that deserves to be read in its entirety, but I will tell you the core of it. He said the yellow line Israel has established in southern Lebanon, the buffer zone it is holding with tanks and troops, will be brought down. He said every line, yellow, green, and red, will be broken. He said no one in Lebanon or abroad would be able to disarm Hezbollah. That is not bluster. That is a political leader telling you exactly what his organization intends to do. And the IDF is still inside Lebanese territory, explicitly maintaining what it calls a security buffer, explicitly saying it will continue to clear the area of Hezbollah infrastructure and operatives even during the truce. 2 armies occupying the same ground, each calling the other's presence a violation. This is not a stable ceasefire. This is 2 fuses burning toward each other. Now zoom out, because the Lebanon front is only one of the fires that lit up this week. On Friday morning, Kuwait's Ministry of Defense announced that two northern border posts had been struck by drones originating from Iraqi territory. The Kuwaiti military spokesman, Colonel Saud Abdulaziz al-Otaibi, confirmed the strikes caused material damage but no casualties. No group claimed responsibility as of the time of this recording, but the context writes the story without a byline. Kuwait has been a target throughout this war. Earlier in the conflict, the IRGC fired 230 drones at facilities hosting U.S. troops across the region, hitting Ali al-Salam Air Base and Camp Arifjan in Kuwait directly. On March 1st, 6 U.S. service members were killed at a logistics post south of Kuwait City when an Iranian drone struck while an all-clear signal was in effect. CBS News reported survivors saying the unit was unprepared and leadership had been warned the post was on Iranian target lists. 67 Kuwaiti service members have been wounded across the duration of the conflict. The Emir of Kuwait himself described it publicly as an unprovoked attack from a neighboring Muslim country. 24 people were arrested in Kuwait in April for a plot to undermine national security with connections traced to Iran. When drones fly out of Iraqi territory and hit Kuwaiti border posts this week, you do not need a claim of responsibility to understand the architecture of what is happening. The armed groups in Iraq that have been part of Iran's proxy network for years do not stop operating because a ceasefire was announced in a different theater. They operate on their own timeline. They have their own objectives. And their message to Kuwait, a country that did not participate in the war against Iran, a country that explicitly barred use of its territory for military action against Tehran, a country whose emir called Iran a friend, is this: neutrality offers no protection. If that message lands the way it is intended to, the geography of this conflict just expanded again. Now, I want you to hold all of that in your head and add one more piece, because it comes from a direction most analysts are not tracking closely enough. Iranian political heavyweight Ali Akbar Velayati posted on X this week that the resistance front views the Bab el-Mandeb Strait the same way it views Hormuz. That statement was amplified by Press TV. Simultaneously, Iranian and Yemeni media are reporting that Somalia will bar Israeli-linked vessels from the Bab el-Mandeb, the choke point connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean. This claim has not been independently confirmed by Reuters or AP, but Velayati is not a fringe voice. He is a senior advisor to the Supreme Leader's office with decades of influence over Iranian foreign policy. When he draws an explicit parallel between Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb, he is not making a casual observation. He is staking out a strategic position. Elizabeth Kendall, president of Girton College at Cambridge and one of the most respected analysts of Yemen and the Gulf, told Al Jazeera this week that simultaneous pressure on Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb would create a nightmare scenario that could cripple trade toward Europe. Think about what that actually means in physical terms. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf exporters have been rerouting oil through pipeline infrastructure that terminates on the Red Sea precisely because Hormuz is contested. If Bab el-Mandeb comes under the same pressure, the alternative route becomes the threatened route. The global energy system, already under maximum stress, runs out of detours. There is no plan C. And here is something else nobody is saying plainly enough. The Houthis have not gone away. Yemen's Houthi forces announced this week they launched missiles at Israel, marking their first direct involvement in the U.S.-Israel war against Iran since the broader conflict began. For months, they operated in the background, harassing shipping in the Red Sea corridor, keeping insurance premiums elevated, keeping commercial operators nervous. Now they are stepping forward explicitly. Think about what that means for the geometry of what Velayati said. You do not need Iran to formally order the closure of Bab el-Mandeb. You do not need a state actor with a flag and a ministry. You need the Houthis, who have demonstrated over 2 years of Red Sea operations that they can make a waterway commercially unusable without blocking it in any legal or formal sense. They mine the insurance premium. They mine the psychological calculation every ship captain makes before filing a route. When Velayati says the resistance front views Bab el-Mandeb the same way it views Hormuz, the Houthis are the instrument he does not have to name, and Qatar sits at the intersection of all of this. Qatar's liquefied natural gas exports, which Europe depends on to fill the gap left by diminished Russian supply, flow through Hormuz. Qatar has been one of the quiet diplomatic facilitators of this conflict, hosting talks, passing messages, but Qatar's energy revenues are hostage to the same waterway that Iran is contesting, and the U.S. Navy is patrolling under shoot-to-kill orders. That is not a comfortable position to be in. That is a country whose economic survival depends on a strait where two armed forces are now authorized to fire on each other with no warning required. The IEA has already called this the greatest energy security crisis in history. Brent crude sat at $105.73 a barrel as of Friday trading. That is after hitting nearly $120 at the peak. That is after starting at $72 a barrel on February 27th. Oil has moved 55% in less than 2 months. Every tanker operator, every shipper, every refinery buyer in the world is pricing in the possibility that this gets worse before it gets better, and they are correct to do so. Now, I want to bring this home because a war that seems distant to most Americans became very close on April 20th. In Washington, D.C., over 150 veterans and military family members gathered in the rotunda of the Cannon House office building. They wore military fatigues. Some walked with canes. Some came in wheelchairs. Some on prosthetic legs. They stood in formation, shoulder to shoulder, the way they were trained. They held red tulips, chosen to honor the Iranian civilians killed by American and Israeli strikes. They unrolled banners that read, "End the war on Iran," and "We can't afford another war." They conducted a flag-folding ceremony, the precise, solemn ceremony reserved for the most formal military honors to commemorate the 13 American service members already killed in this war. They asked to speak with House Speaker Mike Johnson. Capitol Police arrived and told them to leave. They did not leave. Officers began zip-tying hands behind backs. Older veterans with medals on their jackets were led out alongside younger ones still in their 20s. Veterans on prosthetics, veterans in wheelchairs, all of them chanting, "Not another nickel, not another dime. We won't pay for Trump's war crimes." 66 people were arrested. The charge was crowding, obstructing, or incommoding under D.C. Code 22-1307. They were all eventually released. Mike Preissner, executive director of the Center on Conscience and War and an Iraq war veteran, had encouraged military members to become conscientious objectors in a statement before the action. Christina Sarson, an Army veteran from Pennsylvania, said she was there for her sons. She said, and I want you to hear these exact words, "I know the harm that wars do to civilian populations, but also to our soldiers, the loss of life, injuries and lives changed forever, PTSD, and moral injury." The organizations behind this protest include About Face, Veterans Against the War, Veterans for Peace, Common Defense, Military Families Speak Out, and the Center on Conscience and War. These are not people who came to Washington carrying ideology. They are people who came carrying experience. They know what the next phase of this war will cost because they paid the last one's invoice personally. And the images of them being zip-tied, of medals being escorted out of the people's house, spread across social media in a way that nothing else from this war has. NPR reported Friday that the photos and videos have resonated widely, amplified by people who share what the reporting described as frustration and unease about the country's military action. This is a country that is not unified behind this war. A Quinnipiac poll in March found 53% of Americans opposed to U.S. military action against Iran. Pew Research found 61% disapprove of Trump's handling of the conflict. 59% believe the original decision to use force was wrong. Nearly 3 in 5 Americans. And yet on Monday, 66 of their most experienced citizens, people who volunteered to serve, who came home carrying everything a combat deployment gives you to carry, were zip-tied in a government building for asking their elected representative to account for it. Now, let me bring all of this back to Thursday night, to those 4 rockets over Stula, because I want you to understand the precise danger of the moment we are in. Trump extended the ceasefire. That is true. The Israeli and Lebanese ambassadors met at the White House for roughly 2 hours in the highest level Israeli-Lebanese meeting in decades. A second round followed at the State Department. Macron offered to host a rebuilding conference. The diplomatic machinery is moving. But here is what is also true. Hezbollah has been attacking Israeli forces throughout the ceasefire period. The IDF has been operating inside Lebanese territory throughout the ceasefire period, clearing infrastructure and striking what it calls active threats. 2 IDF soldiers have been killed during the ceasefire. 3 Lebanese civilians were killed by Israeli strikes on Thursday alone before the rockets were fired, according to Lebanon's health ministry. The ceasefire is extending, and it is also being violated by both sides every single day. The question is not whether it holds in the abstract. The question is what happens the day it breaks in a way that cannot be absorbed, a way that requires a response, that requires a counter-response. The Hezbollah lawmaker told you this week that every line will be broken. The IDF is explicitly maintaining a military presence on Lebanese soil that Hezbollah says justifies continued resistance. And the wider regional picture is not stabilizing, it is fracturing outward. Drones from Iraq hitting Kuwait. Velayati signaling that Bab el-Mandeb is the next Hormuz. A UN report documenting war crimes by both sides. A ceasefire extended by a president who said less than 72 hours before extending it that he was not interested in extending it. Trump told CNBC this week, when asked about oil prices at $90, that he was surprised they were not much higher. He called current prices, and this is the actual quote, peanuts. He said if Iran had rearmed during the ceasefire window, he could knock that out in about 1 day. He said their Navy is gone, their Air Force is gone, their anti-aircraft is gone. He said he wants an everlasting deal, not a rushed one. And then hours later, rockets flew over northern Israel and a drone struck an artillery position in southern Lebanon. This is the architecture of a war that is not ending. This is a ceasefire that is paper over a fire. Every choke point is contested. Every border is being tested. The diplomatic calendar and the operational calendar are running on completely different clocks. And the people who know what happens when those 2 clocks diverge, the people who have seen it, who have survived it, who came home from it, went to Washington this week to say so, they were zip-tied and walked out. The war continues. The question is not whether the ceasefire holds tonight. Holds. The question is what the map looks like the morning after the night it does not.